In this video, we're going to run through a basic form of Boro patching, seen here in the two examples on this pair of trousers, one on a worn away part of the knee and another on the hem of the trousers. Both use a Sashiko inspired stitch. This form of mending is great for adapting to different types of clothing. It's most often used on jeans and trousers, but I've also used it on jackets and shirts in the past. The original technique is named after the Japanese word boro, meaning tattered or repaired. The Boro technique describes the mending of clothing or bedding through repair and reworking. The technique uses patches of old clothing, like this one here, to cover over worn areas of textiles, traditionally using this straight running stitch, which is the Sashiko stitch, to create lines bonding the fabrics together and quilting them. Sashiko means little stabs in Japanese and is a simple running stitch running across the fabric. The traditional type of Sashiko thread is a white heavyweight cotton thread, but in this video we're going to use an alternative type of embroidery thread. This one that I've got here is just a machine thread that you might already have at home or is quite easy to find. It's a cotton thread, so it works in a similar way to a Sashiko thread, but you just need to double it up so that you get a thicker line when you're hand sewing. The most important thing when you start mending is finding the time to get going on it, and feeling the need to get the exact materials can sometimes stop you from doing that. In this video, we'll work with the traditional technique of Boro and Sashiko, but using materials that are easier to find and that you may even have in your home already. We're working with just a needle. This one that we've got here is a slightly longer one, which can make it easier with the Sashiko running stitch, but you can also just use whatever hand embroidery needles you have at home. We're also going to be using the embroidery thread that we talked about before, the fabric patch, some pins and some scissors. We're trying to keep it as simple as possible in this video. So, to start, we'll find the area which has the hole in the jeans. In this case, it's another hole on the knee, so there's a nice worn away area here, which is pretty perfect for mending. The first stage is to place the patch. With this mending, I'm going to go for doing it on top of the hole. You can also do it underneath, which is what I did on the other examples. It just depends on the style that you're looking to go for and how you prefer to work. So, first off, just going to cut the patch down so it's a more appropriate size for the hole. You want it to be about 1 or 2 centimetres bigger than the hole all the way around. So just going to cut some of the edges off. I've gone for a contrasting patch here, but you can use this same technique with a matching fabric, say if you had some more denim, or you can go for something that's a different fabric but maybe a similar colour so it blends in more. Depends if you want your mend to be a visible or invisible mend. In this case we're going visible, so we've got a nice burgundy fabric. So once you've cut the edges off and made it a more appropriate size, just going to place it over the hole, put our hands under the fabric inside the leg of the jeans and pin the patch in place. So, to do this, you just need a few pins going around the outside edge. It can even be as little as 4 pins when it's a smaller patch. I tend to find that as I'm sewing with this technique by hand, it can be helpful to move the fabric around, but it's good to get it in a kind of secure place first off. I'm just going to do a couple in the corners as well. So once you've got your pins in place and the patch is looking secure like this, you can start to thread up your needle. So as we're working with the machine embroidery thread, I'm going to use a doubled up piece. So this means it's double the length, which I tend to work with a length of about 30 centimetres, so meaning 60 centimetres when you cut it. Thread up the needle and drag it so you've got the two ends meeting each other like that, and it's doubled up all the way down. You can tie a knot at the ends away from the needle, and this creates a thicker thread for stitching and makes it more secure. Often when you're working with just a single thread, it's easy to lose the needle and for it to keep coming off. But in this way, it's very secure and you're not going to lose your needle as you're sewing. So, to start, again, place your hand underneath the patch, and we're going to start working from the inside of the fabric. So this bit will be the fiddliest part, as you'll need to get your hand with the needle underneath and bringing it up through the fabric at a point at the top corner of one side of your patch. It doesn't matter so much which side of the patch you start, that's more of a personal choice, whichever one makes you more comfortable. I've chosen to go on the right hand side of the patch, facing me, but you're going to work your way across the whole patch anyway, so it doesn't matter too much. So to start, it's good to do one stitch overlapping itself just to keep it nice and secure. And then we're just going to start to do a running stitch, working up and down this fabric, backwards and forwards, to secure it in place. At this point, I'm going to just take one of the pins out, smooth it down a little bit there. And start stitching. It's important when you're attaching this that you do at least one stitch going over the edge of the fabric, so you want to be kind of trapping that edge down and making sure that's in place. So with the longer needle, you can weave in and out of the fabric like this, doing a running stitch. This will help you keep the line straight, and it can also just help to get a kind of even spacing between the individual stitches. It depends how kind of particular you are about the look of your finished repaired item as to whether you feel like you want the stitches to be really regular and perfectly the same length, or to be a bit different and a bit mismatched. And that's fine, like whatever the style is that you're going for with your repair, that's down to your personal style. In this case I'm going for a slightly longer stitch, but you can go shorter as well, you can keep it quite tight. It's also your choice how close the lines of stitching go to each other. Again, yeah, you can space it out so there's maybe like a centimetre between them, or you can do them right next to each other so you get a really textured effect to your stitching and to the application of the patch onto the trousers. As you go, you might need to take out some of your pins. You've just got to kind of work that out as you're going, whether they're getting in the way for you or not. Again, when I reach the end of the patch, I'm trying to do a little stitch at least going over the edge there just to secure that and to help it stop fraying at a later point. So as I'm 2 lines into it now, hopefully you can see how it's starting to build up. I'm going to carry on doing this across the whole of the patch, and hopefully we should finish with a nicely repaired trouser knee. So when you get to the point where your thread has come to the end, you can do the same thing that we did to start and do a double stitch, like so. And then go to the reverse of the fabric, cut the thread at the top closest to the needle, and then with your 2 pieces of thread, take them apart and you can tie a double knot there just to secure it in place at the back. And then you can just trim those embroidery threads down. Turning the trouser back the right way. Just repeat the same process that we did when we started out at the top right hand side of the fabric. Coming up here. To do a double stitch on the spot. And then weaving the needle in and out of the fabric. As many times as is comfortable on the length of your needle. So I'm going to carry on doing this and working my way across the patch. It's important to be aware of not having too many folds in your fabric so that you don't stitch that into place and hold it there permanently. But sometimes it can be helpful to kind of scrunch up the jean a bit when you're working on the knee. So you've just got to go with what's comfortable for you to sew with and how you feel it works best. Sometimes when you're doing this technique, it can be useful to have an embroidery hoop, but it depends on the part of the jean or the item of clothing that you're working on. So you can kind of work it out based on what you're planning to stitch, and also just based on how comfortable you feel working with it just flat. Keep smoothing out the fabric as you go. As you can see, like this area here has started to pucker up a little bit. So what you can do is take the pins out and just smooth it out flat, pulling it tightly at the corner to get that flat surface to stitch into. It's important that you just hold the trousers in a way, or whatever it is that you're mending, that makes it just feel like stitching is the most comfortable it can be for you. Don't get yourself into too many weird positions, which is quite easy to do when you're concentrating hard on what you're sewing. But just keep moving the jeans around or the item of clothing around, and you'll find positions that work best for you, depending which angle you're sewing from or what height you're sewing at. Actually, fixing the knee is probably one of the trickiest parts because it's so in the middle of the fabric, and you have to have your hand quite far in and carry a lot of the weight of the clothing. So sometimes working this stitch to start with on, say, the hem, or maybe if you're doing it onto a jacket or something that opens up flat, can be a good way to practice and have a bit more control over what you're stitching. So all there is to do at this point is to keep on stitching across the patch, working your way to the other side. It's the same process, just repeated, and the main things to remember are just being aware of keeping the fabric flat, being aware of trapping the ends of the patch with stitch, so going over the ends, like as you can see going along here, and just having patience with it. Really, it's something that can take a bit of time. You know, your thread can get tangled, your thread could break, maybe you could get in a bit of a mess with how you hold the fabric depending which direction you go from. But if you just put a bit of time into it and have patience with it, you'll be able to mend up your jeans and other items of clothing in no time using this classic Boro inspired technique. Okay, so here I am just finishing off the last line of stitching. So I've worked across the patch now. As you can see, there's rows of the stitching running all the way across, and I'm just about to finish the last line now. It's good to do a row of stitching quite close to the edge of the fabric, just so when the woven patch, it might start to fray a little bit, but if there's a line of stitching there, then it'll only fray up to that line. So you can just finish off your last row of stitching in the same way that you've done all the other ends of your embroidery thread, just cutting at the back and tying a double knot. And trimming the thread down. So once you're all done, you can take out the pins that might still be in the patch if you haven't removed them along the way. And that's it. So that's how the Boro technique looks from the outside of the fabric. Gives quite a nice texture to the applique, and I've used a variety of lengths and kind of widths between the lines of stitching here to give a more kind of organic feel to the stitch. Again, you can use this technique, like I said before, to placing the patch underneath the hole instead, and that's how the different patching technique looks when you place it underneath. Just using the same straight stitch going back and forth in the same way, but instead you just have the stitch on the outside and a flash of the patching fabric coming through the hole. So that's it on Boro and Sashiko. If you have any more questions about how to do the technique or need any advice, message us on our Facebook and Instagram at Fast Fashion Therapy.